The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Elena Ward almost ignored it. Daniel had been late before, but he always sent a message. She was sitting alone in the dim living room, half watching television, half listening for the sound of his car in the driveway. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. "Mrs. Ward?" "Yes. This is Detective Samuel Reed. I'm sorry to call you this late." Something in his voice made her sit upright. "There's been an accident," he said. "Your husband's vehicle was involved." Elena stopped breathing. "Is he hurt?" There was a pause. "I'm afraid your husband did not survive." For several seconds, the room seemed to tilt around her. She asked the question again, because the first answer could not possibly have been real. "What did you say?" "I'm very sorry." After that, the night became fragments. Flashing lights. Rain striking the windshield. A police officer opening a door for her. The smell of wet asphalt. Her own hands trembling in her lap as the city passed beyond the glass. At the morgue, Detective Reed spoke quietly, explaining procedures Elena could barely understand. "We need you to make an identification." She followed him down a white corridor. The room was cold enough to make her teeth ache. Behind a glass partition lay a body covered by a sheet. Elena stopped several feet away. "No," she whispered. Reed said nothing. A technician pulled the sheet down. Elena saw Daniel. His face was pale and strangely peaceful. There was dried blood near his temple, and the familiar scar above his eyebrow was visible beneath the harsh fluorescent light. Her knees weakened. "That's my husband." She stared at him, searching for something that would tell her this was a mistake. Then she saw the wedding ring. She had placed it on his finger herself 3 years earlier. "I know that ring," she whispered. The technician asked her to confirm the identification formally. Elena signed the papers with a hand that barely seemed connected to her body. Outside, dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. By the time she reached home, she could no longer remember the drive. The house looked exactly as Daniel had left it. His coat hung beside the door. His shoes were near the stairs. A half-finished glass of water stood on the kitchen counter. Everything was waiting for him. Except he would never come home. Elena walked through the rooms carrying his keys in her hand. She sat on the edge of their bed and stared at them until tears blurred the metal. How could 3 years of laughter, arguments, plans, and promises disappear in a single night? She finally lay down without changing clothes. Minutes later, she noticed the key ring resting on the nightstand. Elena frowned. She counted the keys once. Then again. There should have been 4. There were only 3. She tried to remember when she had last seen all 4 keys together. Daniel had carried them everywhere, even when he claimed he was only stepping outside for a minute. She could not remember the last time he had handed her the ring. The missing key was ordinary, yet its absence seemed louder than the silence around her. Elena turned the ring between her fingers, wondering where Daniel had gone that night, and why he needed a key he never told her about. And for the first time that night, Elena felt something other than grief. She felt fear. The fear Elena had felt in the bedroom did not leave with the morning. It followed her into the funeral home, into the church, and through every handshake offered by people who seemed to know how she was supposed to grieve. 2 days after Daniel's death, the church was crowded. Elena sat in the first row wearing a black dress she had chosen without remembering choosing it. Flowers surrounded the coffin. Someone had placed a framed photograph of Daniel beside the altar, smiling in the way he always smiled for cameras, confident and almost amused. She could not look at it for long. Every time she did, she remembered the cold room at the morgue. The scar above his eyebrow. The ring. The signature beneath her name. "Mrs. Ward." Elena turned. A tall man stood beside her. His gray suit was perfectly pressed, but his face looked exhausted. "Marcus Vale," he said softly. "Daniel's business partner." She knew the name. Daniel had mentioned him often, though never with much detail. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "Thank you." His eyes moved toward the coffin. "I still can't believe it." Neither could Elena. For a moment, Marcus seemed ready to say something else. Then his gaze shifted toward the church doors. "Was Daniel alone?" Elena asked. Marcus looked back at her. "What? When the accident happened, was he alone?" His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "I don't know." "You worked with him every day. That doesn't mean I knew where he was every night." The answer was too quick. Elena noticed. So did Marcus. He lowered his voice. "You should try not to think about those things right now." "Why?" "Because you've just lost your husband." Then he walked away. Elena watched him disappear among the mourners. That was when memories began returning. During the last month of Daniel's life, he had become distant. He took calls outside. He lowered his voice whenever Elena entered a room. Several times, he had told her he was working late, only to return after midnight smelling of rain and unfamiliar cologne. Once, she had asked where he had been. He kissed her forehead and said, "You worry too much." She had believed him. Now every explanation sounded rehearsed. After the service, Elena returned home alone. The house was unbearably quiet. She walked into Daniel's study. For 3 years, she had respected his privacy. There was one drawer she had never opened because Daniel had once told her it contained confidential business papers. Now she pulled it open. It was locked. Elena stared at it. Then she remembered the missing key. She searched Daniel's desk, his coat pockets, and the small tray beside the bedroom mirror. Nothing. Finally, she found a thin key taped beneath the underside of his desk. Her hand shook as she unlocked the drawer. Inside were documents, receipts, and a black envelope. She opened it. Photographs slid onto the desk. Daniel appeared in every one. But Elena did not recognize the woman standing beside him. She was young, dark-haired, and looking at Daniel with an intimacy Elena had not seen in years. Elena picked up another photograph. Then another. Her breathing became shallow. On the back of the final photograph was a date. She read it twice. The day before Daniel died. Elena stared at the woman's face. Then she whispered, "Who are you?" And somewhere beneath her grief, something colder began to awaken. The name was missing, but the woman's face was not. Elena stared until her eyes burned, knowing that whatever Daniel had hidden, it had followed him to his grave and home. The woman's face stayed with Elena long after she had put the photographs away. By morning, grief had been replaced by a question she could no longer silence. Who was Claire Morgan? Elena began carefully. She searched Daniel's old emails, company directories, and messages saved on the laptop he rarely allowed her to touch. At first, she found nothing. Then, buried inside an employee archive, she found Claire's name. Claire Morgan, former financial analyst. Resigned 6 months earlier. Elena stared at the screen. Why would Daniel keep photographs of a woman who no longer worked for him? She searched further and found an old company photograph. Claire was standing near Daniel, smiling politely at the camera. But the image confirmed what Elena already feared. This was the woman. Elena found a number in an old contact file and called it. A woman answered after several rings. "Hello? Is this Claire Morgan?" Silence. "Who is this?" "My name is Elena Ward." The silence became longer. "I'm Daniel's wife." Claire ended the call. Elena called again. This time Claire answered. "I don't want to talk to you." "You knew my husband." "Yes." "Then you know why I'm calling." "I know why." Elena swallowed. Please. I need answers. Another pause. Tomorrow, Claire said. 4 o'clock. Belmont Cafe. Come alone. The following afternoon, Elena arrived early. Claire entered 10 minutes later wearing a dark coat and carrying no purse. She looked nervous, as though she expected someone to be watching. She sat opposite Elena. I'm sorry about Daniel, she said. Elena almost laughed. Were you? Claire looked down. Yes. Were you sorry while you were sleeping with him? Claire closed her eyes briefly. So you found the photographs. I found enough. Claire's voice became quieter. Yes. Daniel and I were involved. The word struck Elena harder than she expected. How long? Almost a year. Elena stared at her. A year? He told me your marriage was complicated. He told you lies. Probably. That answer hurt more than an excuse would have. Elena leaned forward. Did he love you? Claire looked directly at her. I thought he did. And now? I don't know. Elena's hands tightened around her cup. What happened? Claire glanced toward the window before answering. Daniel changed near the end. How? He became afraid. Of what? Someone. Who? I never knew. Elena remembered the missing key. Why didn't he tell the police? Claire gave a bitter smile. Because he didn't trust them. Elena felt a chill. What exactly did he say? Claire hesitated. 3 nights before he disappeared, Daniel called me. He sounded terrified. Terrified enough to leave me. He said something I never forgot. Claire leaned closer. He said, if anything happens to me, don't trust the police or Elena. The words seemed to empty the room of sound. Elena could barely breathe. He said my name? Yes. Why? I don't know. Did he accuse me of something? No. Then why would he warn you about me? Claire looked away. That's what frightened me. Elena sat motionless. For 3 years, she had believed she knew Daniel's secrets, his fears, his weaknesses. Now she wondered whether every memory had been carefully constructed around a man she never truly understood. The affair was painful, but the warning was worse. If Daniel had feared the police and feared Elena, then perhaps his death had never been an accident. And perhaps the missing key was not missing at all. Perhaps Daniel had taken it with him for a reason. That question followed her home. She stood outside the house for several minutes before entering, suddenly aware of every dark window around her. Inside, Daniel's study remained exactly as she had left it. The photographs were still hidden in the drawer. Elena touched the lock. For the first time, she wondered whether Daniel had hidden them from her, or whether he had expected someone else to find them. The thought followed Elena home from her meeting with Claire. She tried to dismiss it as grief, anger, and the natural confusion of a widow who had just discovered that her husband had been unfaithful. But Claire's warning had planted something inside her that would not die. If anything happens to me, don't trust the police or Elena. By midnight, Elena was sitting at Daniel's desk, staring at the photographs again. She needed facts. The next morning, she contacted the police department and asked for everything they could legally release about the accident. Detective Reed called her back himself. You're asking a lot of questions for someone who just buried her husband, he said. I need to know what happened. You already know what happened. No, Elena said. I know what I was told. There was silence. Finally, Reed agreed to meet her. At the station, he placed a thin folder on the table. Daniel left his office at 8:15 p.m., Reed explained. The crash was reported at approximately 11:20. 3 hours. Roughly. Where was he? We don't know. Elena looked at the photographs of the wrecked car. Did anyone see him during those 3 hours? Not that we could confirm. She stared at the report. 3 hours had vanished. That evening, Elena searched Daniel's phone records. She expected nothing. Instead, she found activity. His phone had connected to a tower at 9:06 p.m., then again at 10:14. Her heart began beating faster. Daniel had supposedly been driving toward the highway. Why had his phone been active? Then she found the message. 10:17 p.m. Sent from Daniel's number to an unfamiliar number. 4 words. She knows. Elena read them again. She knows. Who was she? Claire? Elena? Someone else? Her hands began shaking. She called the number. It had been disconnected. After that, paranoia settled over her life like smoke. Every car outside the house seemed to slow deliberately. Every unfamiliar face made her wonder whether someone was watching her. At night, she checked the locks repeatedly. Then Detective Reed called. There's something else you should know. Elena sat down. The identification was unusual. What do you mean? The morgue confirmed the body through visual identification and personal effects. My husband's ring. Yes. And the facial features matched. But the medical examiner never completed conclusive DNA confirmation before the funeral. Elena felt cold. Why not? Your family requested an expedited burial. Elena remembered signing papers, crying, barely understanding what anyone was saying. I never requested that. Reed paused. I assumed someone close to Daniel had. Elena stood abruptly. Who? I'm still checking. She ended the call and walked toward the bedroom. Daniel's keys were still on the nightstand. 3 keys, not 4. The photographs were still inside the locked drawer. Claire's warning echoed through her mind. For the first time, Elena allowed herself to consider the impossible. She had looked through the glass. She had seen Daniel's face. She had recognized his ring. She had signed the papers. But she had never proved, scientifically, that the dead man was Daniel. Elena covered her mouth. A terrible realization spread through her. She might not have buried her husband at all. She might have buried a stranger. And if that was true, then Daniel's death was not the beginning of the mystery. It was the first lie. And somewhere, perhaps, Daniel was still alive. That possibility frightened her more than death ever had. Because if Daniel was alive, someone had wanted Elena to believe he was dead. And someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make her believe it. She looked again at the message on the screen. She knows. Elena suddenly understood that those words might not have been a warning about her. They might have been a warning to her. But from whom? She did not know. Not yet. What she did know was that the grave outside belonged to someone, and she could no longer be certain it belonged to the man she had married. And if Daniel had survived the crash, then every question she had asked so far had been pointed in the wrong direction. The truth was somewhere else, waiting for her to find the one person who knew exactly what had happened that night to Daniel. The warning on the note seemed to remain in Elena's mind long after she had read it. You identified the wrong man. She read the sentence again, then folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. Someone had entered the house without forcing the door. Someone had known where she would be looking. And someone wanted her to understand that Daniel's death was not the story she had been told. Before leaving the room, Elena turned back toward the study. Daniel's desk stood exactly as she had left it, papers scattered across the surface, drawers half open, his computer dark. She remembered what Marcus had said earlier, that Daniel had been frightened, that he had wanted to disappear. If that was true, there had to be something Daniel had hidden from everyone. She began searching again. For nearly an hour, Elena examined every drawer, cabinet, and shelf. She found nothing until she noticed a narrow gap behind a row of old business books. One book sat farther forward than the others. She pulled it. The shelf shifted with a faint click. Elena froze. Behind the bookshelf was a shallow compartment concealed in the wall. Inside rested a black metal box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. There were bank statements, contracts, photographs, encrypted account numbers, and documents bearing the name of a private investment company she had never heard of. The figures were enormous. Money had moved through several accounts, sometimes within hours, sometimes in amounts large enough to change everything Elena believed about their life. Daniel had not simply been hiding money. He had been moving it. Then she saw another name. Victor Hale. The name appeared repeatedly beside transfers, investment agreements, and handwritten notes. Victor was a powerful investor whose influence reached into several companies connected to Daniel's business. Elena had heard him mentioned at dinners, always with careful respect, never casually. She gathered the documents and confronted Marcus before dawn. He looked at the papers and immediately understood. "You knew," Elena whispered. Marcus lowered his eyes. "I knew Daniel was involved." "In what?" "Something dangerous." "What does Victor Hale have to do with it?" Marcus hesitated. "Daniel wanted to disappear," he finally said. "He believed someone was threatening him." "Who?" Marcus said nothing. "Was it Victor?" His silence was answer enough, but Elena demanded more. "Marcus, if Daniel was afraid, why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were safer not knowing." The words frightened her more than any confession could have. That night, Elena barely slept. Every sound inside the estate seemed deliberate. Pipes groaned. Floorboards creaked. Wind brushed against the windows. Then she heard footsteps downstairs. Elena rose slowly. She reached the staircase and listened. Nothing. She descended. The front door stood open. Cold air moved through the hallway, stirring the curtains. Elena stopped several feet away. On the floor lay a folded sheet of paper. She picked it up. 3 words were written across it in dark ink. You identified the wrong man. Her breath caught. She looked toward the open doorway, but the driveway was empty. Then her phone vibrated. A message appeared from an unknown number. Ask Marcus what Daniel really knew. Elena stared at the screen, realizing the note had not been the end of the warning. It had been an invitation to uncover the truth. Elena considered calling the police. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but another thought stopped her. If Marcus had known about Daniel's fear and had chosen to remain silent, then the police might not be people she could trust. She needed to understand what Daniel had discovered before revealing how much she knew. She returned to the study and spread the documents across the desk. One photograph showed Daniel standing beside Victor at a gathering. Another showed a warehouse Elena recognized from Daniel's business trip. On the back, Daniel had written a date and a word, evidence. Her stomach tightened. Whatever Daniel had been hiding, he had not hidden it to protect himself alone. He had been collecting proof. And someone had just told her to ask Marcus. She knew then that Marcus's silence was no longer protection. It was part of the secret. The words on the unknown message remained with Elena through the funeral, through every hour that followed. 3 days after Daniel was buried, she still could not accept that he was gone. The estate had become a place of echoes. At night, Elena heard footsteps outside the study. She heard Daniel calling her name from upstairs. Once, while standing in the kitchen, she heard his voice clearly behind her. Elena! She turned so quickly that a glass fell from her hand and shattered across the floor. No one was there. She began checking the locks repeatedly. Front door. Back door. Windows. Then she would return 10 minutes later and check them again. Sleep became almost impossible. When she finally closed her eyes, she saw Daniel standing beside the wrecked car, his face bruised, his mouth moving without sound. She would wake convinced someone was inside the house. The police were less concerned. One officer told her grief could create vivid sensations. Another suggested she stay with family. Elena listened without arguing. But she knew what she had heard. And she knew something else. Daniel's death had never felt like an accident. The thought became unbearable, so Elena contacted Detective Samuel Reed. Reed had investigated the original crash. He arrived at the estate shortly before sunset, carrying a thin folder and wearing an exhausted expression. You said you found something, he said. I found too many things. She told him about the hidden compartment, the financial records, Victor Hale, Marcus's warning, and the message left at the door. Reed listened without interrupting. When she finished, he opened his folder. There was something about the crash, he said quietly. Elena stared at him. The vehicle had been deliberately damaged before the accident. Her heartbeat quickened. Damaged how? Someone interfered with it. We found evidence suggesting tampering, but it was inconclusive. There wasn't enough to prove sabotage beyond reasonable doubt. So you knew? I suspected. Then why did everyone call it an accident? Because suspicion isn't evidence. Elena looked toward the dark window. What if the person who wanted Daniel dead knew exactly how to make it look like one? Reed did not answer. She turned back to him. There is something I need to ask you. He waited. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. If that wasn't my husband in the morgue, where is Daniel? For several seconds, Reed said nothing. Then his expression changed. He looked genuinely frightened. Elena, I need you to understand something. If you're right, then the person who died wasn't Daniel. and whoever arranged this may have known exactly how the identification would happen. A knock interrupted him. 3 slow knocks. Both of them froze. Elena looked toward the front door. Reed reached beneath his jacket. Another 3 knocks came. "Elena," he whispered, "don't open that door." But she was already walking toward it. She stopped with her hand on the lock. Every instinct told her to step away. Instead, she opened the door. Cold evening air swept into the hallway. A man stood beneath the porch light. For 1 second, Elena could not breathe. The face was thinner. There was a scar near his temple. His clothes were worn, and exhaustion had hollowed his eyes. But she knew that face. She had kissed it. She had argued with it. She had watched it disappear into a coffin. Daniel stared at her. He looked older than she remembered. "Elena," he said. Her knees nearly gave way. Behind her, Reed whispered something she could not hear. Daniel took 1 step forward. "I need you to listen to me," he said. "You have been looking for the wrong truth." Elena stared at him, tears filling her eyes. "Daniel?" He nodded. Then he looked past her, directly at Detective Reed. "They know I'm alive." A distant car engine suddenly roared to life outside. Daniel's expression changed. "They found me." Reed immediately moved toward the doorway, but Daniel grabbed Elena's arm. "There isn't much time." And as headlights appeared at the end of the driveway, Elena realized the man she had buried 3 days earlier was standing beside her, alive, terrified, and running from someone who was already coming for him. Elena stared at Daniel as though looking at a ghost. "No!" The word came out quietly. Daniel remained on the porch, breathing hard, his face pale. He looked thinner than she remembered. His clothes hung loosely from his shoulders, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes. A scar crossed his temple. But it was him. "No," Elena said again, louder this time. "You're not Daniel." "I am." She stepped backward. "You let me bury you." Daniel's expression broke. "Elena, I had no choice." "No choice?" Her voice rose into a scream. "I watched them lower a coffin into the ground. I stood beside your grave." Detective Reed moved closer, but Elena raised a hand. "Don't." She could not take her eyes from Daniel. "How could you do that to me?" Daniel swallowed. "I never died." "Then who was in that morgue?" "Someone they wanted you to believe was me," he explained quickly. Someone inside his business had discovered that Daniel was investigating missing investments, secret transfers, and Victor Hale's network. Daniel had learned that the investigation had reached people powerful enough to make him disappear permanently. "They were planning to kill me," he said. "I found out before they could. So you ran." "I was forced to." "And you let me think you were dead?" Daniel looked away. Elena noticed the hesitation. Something was wrong. "You're telling me someone substituted a body," she said. "Then why didn't you contact me?" "I couldn't risk it." "You knew about the funeral?" "Yes." "You watched?" Daniel remained silent. That silence hurt more than anything else. "You watched me bury you." "I had to." Elena shook her head. "No." "You chose to." Daniel stepped inside, but she immediately moved away from him. "Don't come closer." He stopped. Reed watched them both carefully. Elena began asking questions. "What was the first place we lived together?" "Our apartment on Mercer Street." "What did you call me when you were angry?" "Ellie." "What did you say on our wedding night?" Daniel answered correctly. Every detail was perfect. He remembered arguments, forgotten jokes, the scar on Elena's wrist, the song playing when they first danced together. Yet one question destroyed his certainty. "Who identified your body?" Daniel's face tightened. "I don't know." "You expect me to believe that?" The substitution was arranged before the crash. Then why was I allowed to identify it? I said I didn't know. Elena stared at him. You know everything about us, but you don't know the most important thing. Daniel had no answer. Then Elena remembered another name. Claire. Daniel's expression changed instantly. His eyes dropped. Why did you react like that? Elena, who was Claire? Daniel took a breath. Claire was never my mistress. The room seemed to tilt. What? She was helping me. With Victor? Daniel nodded. Claire had discovered that Victor was using people inside my company. She contacted me. We started investigating him together. Elena's anger faltered. All those messages? Evidence. All those secrets? Protection. She searched his face. And the photographs? Daniel looked devastated. I was trying to expose Victor. Reed finally spoke. Then why hide all of this from your wife? Daniel looked directly at Elena. Because I knew they were watching you. Elena felt cold. You could have trusted me. I wanted to. But you didn't. Daniel's eyes filled with regret. No. He lowered his head. There is something worse. Elena waited. I deliberately let you believe I was dead. The admission struck harder than his return. Why? Because I needed them to believe you knew nothing. Elena's lips trembled. How long? Since the crash. She stared at him in disbelief. All this time? She remembered every night she had spent alone, every unanswered question, every moment she had begged for an explanation. Now the explanation stood before her, and it frightened her more than silence ever had. Daniel nodded. I watched you from a distance. I saw the funeral. I saw you return home. I watched the house. You watched me? Yes. While I was grieving? I was trying to protect you. No. Elena whispered. You were controlling what I knew. Daniel could not deny it. Then headlights swept across the windows. Reed turned toward the road. A vehicle had stopped outside. Daniel's face went white. They found me. Elena looked at him. For the first time, Elena wondered whether Daniel had returned to save her, or because he needed her. The headlights remained outside, motionless, while Daniel explained what had brought him to the edge of death. Victor Hale, he said, had been using legitimate investments to move illegal money through Daniel's company. Accounts were opened, closed, and transferred between shell companies. Employees who asked questions were suddenly dismissed. One man who had threatened to speak disappeared. I thought Victor was laundering money, Daniel said. Then I realized he was removing anyone who could expose him. Elena listened, but something in his explanation felt rehearsed. You investigated him alone? At first. Then why did Claire know? Daniel hesitated. Because I needed someone I could trust. Elena looked away. That answer hurt. She returned to the study and opened the hidden compartment again. Daniel followed, but she refused to let him touch anything. If you want me to believe you, she said, you tell me the truth. She spread the documents across the desk. Most concerned Victor. But beneath them, she found older records, dated months before the crash. Her hand stopped. There were photographs of her father, bank records, old business correspondence, and pages of handwritten notes about Elena's family. Daniel had investigated them. Not recently. Months before he claimed Victor became a threat. Elena slowly turned toward him. What is this? Daniel said nothing. My father worked for Victor. Yes. You knew? Yes. The words seemed to drain the room of air. Elena picked up another document. Her father's name appeared beside payments from one of Victor's companies. Another page contained questions about business relationships, private meetings, and information her father might have possessed. Then she found a sentence written in Daniel's handwriting. Marriage may provide access to family records and contacts. Elena stared at it. Her voice became almost inaudible. Was that why you married me? Daniel stepped forward. No. Don't lie. I didn't know what our marriage would become. You married me because my family was useful. I married you because I loved you. Which came first? Daniel stopped. That silence was enough. Elena felt memories changing shape. Their first meeting. His questions about her father. The interest he had shown in her family history. The way he had encouraged conversations about old business connections she barely understood. All those moments suddenly looked different. You chose me, she whispered, because you thought I could lead you to something. At the beginning, yes. Her eyes filled with tears. But it became real. You don't get to decide that makes it better. I loved you. Maybe you did. I still do. Elena laughed bitterly. Love doesn't erase what you did. Daniel's face tightened. I was trying to protect you. You were using me. I was afraid. So was I. She pointed toward the documents. You watched me grieve. You lied about your death. You investigated my family. You married me while hiding why you needed me. Daniel had no defense left. I never planned for this, he whispered. But you planned everything before this. The words settled between them. Outside, the waiting vehicle remained silent. Elena looked at Daniel and realized the question was no longer whether he had betrayed her. It was whether anything between them had ever been untouched by his secrets. Daniel reached for her hand. She pulled away. You want me to believe your feelings became real, she said. Then prove it. How? Tell me everything. Daniel looked toward the hidden documents. For the first time, Elena saw fear replace calculation in his eyes. There is one thing I never told you, he said. What? My reason for investigating your father was not Victor. Elena stared at him. Then who was it? Daniel's answer came quietly. Your father knew who ordered the first murder. Elena felt the room go cold. And Daniel, she whispered, who was murdered? He looked toward the door. Someone in my own family. Elena could not speak. Her father had never mentioned a murder, or suggested their family knew. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Because I needed to know whether your father was involved. And was he? Daniel looked at her with unbearable sadness. I still don't know. The silence after Daniel's admission lasted until Detective Reed finally spoke. If your father knew about the first murder, then we need evidence. Daniel looked at him. You reopened the case? I never closed it, Reed answered. I only stopped pretending the evidence was enough. That night, Reed returned to the police station and accessed the original accident file. He compared photographs, medical records, fingerprints, dental charts, and the morgue report. Something immediately bothered him. The identification had depended on damaged remains, incomplete records, and a mortuary employee who had later resigned without explanation. Reed requested fresh forensic testing. The results arrived 2 days later. The body buried as Daniel Cole was not Daniel Cole. The fingerprints were different. Dental records did not match. DNA testing confirmed what Reed had begun to suspect. Someone had deliberately created a false identity. The dead man had been chosen because his height, build, and facial injuries could make him resemble Daniel after the crash. His death had then been hidden beneath Daniel's name. Reed followed the trail. It led to a corrupt employee at the mortuary, who had altered records after receiving money through an account connected to one of Victor Hale's companies. Another payment led to Marcus. When Reed confronted him, Marcus finally broke. "I helped Daniel disappear," he admitted. Elena felt the word strike harder than she expected. "You knew?" Marcus nodded. "Daniel came to me before the crash. He believed Victor was going to kill him. He asked me to help create the illusion that he was dead. You helped him? I thought I was saving his life. What happened to the man in the morgue?" Marcus lowered his eyes. "I didn't know who he was." That answer offered no comfort. Reed placed the forensic report on the table. "You didn't know his name," he said, "but you helped conceal his death." Marcus began to cry. "I never wanted anyone innocent to die. But someone did," Reed replied. Daniel stood apart from them, staring at the report. For months, he had told himself that survival justified everything. He had believed disappearing was necessary to expose Victor. He had convinced himself that Elena's grief was temporary, that the deception would eventually lead to justice. Now he understood what his plan had required. A dead stranger had been turned into him. A grieving wife had been left beside a false grave. Records had been falsified. Marcus had become an accomplice. And Daniel had accepted all of it because he believed his own life mattered more. Elena looked at him. "You wanted to expose criminals," she said. "But you became willing to let innocent people disappear too." Daniel could not meet her eyes. "I thought I had no choice." "You always had choices." The words left him silent. Reed gathered the documents. He warned them that the investigation could no longer remain private. Every person connected to the false identification might now become a target, and every secret Daniel had buried could become evidence against him. Elena realized that the danger was no longer something approaching from outside. It had already entered their lives through the choices they had made. And it was growing. "This changes everything," he said. "Victor is still dangerous. Marcus may face charges. And Daniel, you may have survived the murder attempt, but that doesn't mean you're innocent." Daniel nodded slowly. For the first time, he seemed to understand that surviving was not the same as being justified. Elena looked at the false death certificate lying between them. She had spent days believing the truth would set everything right. Now she understood something darker. Truth could expose a crime. It could reveal a conspiracy. It could even bring the guilty into the light. But truth could not bring back the innocent man whose body had been used to bury Daniel's secrets. And somewhere beyond the estate, Victor Hale was still free. Reed's phone suddenly rang. He answered, listened, and his expression hardened. "What happened?" Elena asked. Reed slowly lowered the phone. "Victor knows Daniel is alive." Daniel looked toward the window. Then Reed added the words that changed everything. "He's coming for both of you."